cancer survivors of Reddit. What was the symptom that convinced you to see the doctor? Story 1, I was putting on my bra one day and felt a lump the size of a golf ball. Freaked out and went to the ER. They did an ultrasound and said it was nothing but would schedule another ultrasound in 2 days. Did that one, and they said it was nothing. A couple days later, my doc called me because she saw that I had them done. She didn't trust the results and sent me to a breast assessment center. They did a mammogram and said that they would schedule a biopsy. Did the biopsy a week later. It was cancer. Within a month, it was the size of softball, and in my lymph nodes, aggressive chemo, a double mastectomy, and a year's worth of maintenance chemo later. I'm good. February 2nd, I was 6 years cancer-free. Story 2, one afternoon, I finished peeing, and afterward looking down, I noticed the water had a pink tint, no pain, nothing. Went to a local urologist who set up some simple tests. My left kidney was completely eaten up with cancer, except for that pink water. No other symptoms. At surgery, no more problems. Story 3, my wife was losing weight, and then her lung collapsed. No pain, trouble breathing, stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer. Diagnosed 2019, chemo, immuno, and radiation. She's been cancer-free going on 2 years. It is possible. Story 4, so painful headaches that I couldn't sleep. Eyeballs did hurt too. I had troubles keeping myself balanced, and bright light gave me a little pain. Stage 4 brain cancer, glioblastoma multiforme. There's no cure for that. In 2021 when diagnosed, almost 29-year-old now, but my time is running out. I feel horrible and hopeless. I just can't do it anymore. Story 5, when I was 6, I had cold flu symptoms. Mom took me to the DR, and they said that's what it was. My mom convinced him to do blood work because she felt it was something else. Ended up being leukemia, and we were lucky to have caught it early. Still alive over 35 years later. Story 6, I got sick one weekend. Fever, chills, swollen lymph nodes in my neck. By Monday, I felt fine. The lymph node on the left side of my neck remained slightly swollen. Didn't think much about it until months later when I had a persistent sore throat. It didn't hurt much, just like when you wake up after snoring all night. You get a drink of water, and the pain goes away. Except it didn't, so I went to an ear, nose, and throat guy who scoped me and said there was something going on there. So he sent me for a scan, then he sent me for a scan with contrast, then he sent me for a biopsy, and I had throat cancer. A few months of daily radiation treatments, and every other week chemo, and one last scan, and I was told the throat cancer was in remission, yay, but I was told there is something in your lower abdomen that bears looking into, a couple colonoscopies and a biopsy later, and I had colon cancer. The throat cancer hadn't spread. It was just an independent development. The colon cancer was resolved with surgery, no radiation or chemo needed, had several years of clean follow-up testing, and all was well until my yearly FICL showed a dramatic increase in my PSA prostate-specific antigens. IRC went from 0, 3 last year to 13, 5 this year. That's a pretty dramatic increase, and prompted a visit to the urologist. He found such a dramatic increase to be somewhat suspicious. In order to retest, he also checked my prostate and found nothing unusual. The new test came back at 0, 5, so there's nothing to worry about this time, but now it's one more thing I have to worry about. So, if you've got some symptoms that can't be explained, get it checked out. It isn't always something to worry about, but sometimes it very much is. Edit, I just want to thank everyone who responded and wish me well. Moral of the story, get it checked. If the doctor poo-poos it, get it checked by a different doctor. Ultimately, what you do is up to you. But if you want to see you children's graduations and walk your little girl down the aisle and hold your grandchildren in your arms someday, just get it checked. Story 7, I was 15. I noticed an article for how to spot skin cancer in 17 magazine, and one of the example photos resembled a beauty mark on my right shoulder. I brought it up to my mom, and she brushed it off and told me I was fine. At the time, my family doctor was someone I had seen often due to other chronic mystery health stuff, which I later figured out in my 20s. We went to him as a follow-up for that chronic issue, and at the end of the appointment, I asked him about the mole. He told me verbatim, "You're okay. That's nothing to worry about. Your mom is right. Go home and put some lotion on it and you'll be fine." I was 20 and I began having a weird itch on my shoulder. I thought maybe it was my new clothing detergent because I have sensitive skin, but after a week or two of trial and error, I didn't see any changes. I saw my mole was inflamed. I assumed from the itching and decided to keep an eye on it every day for a week. The shape changed slightly. At first I thought I was crazy, but I took photos to keep track. On the last day, I stepped out of my shower and I looked in the mirror to see blood. It had started to bleed without much reason to. That night, I made an appointment with a dermatologist, and within another 7 days, I was admitted to oncology. It was 3 weeks before my 21st birthday. Turns out I had stage 4 melanoma. It took the top doctors in my state 4 years, 3 surgeries, a 2-year-long experimental infusion treatment, regular radioactive PET body scans, and every ounce of hope I had. in order to come out on the other side. I'm very lucky to say I am just under 6 years in remission and counting. Had my doctors caught this earlier, the cancer would not have migrated, and it could have been one surgery to be done. The treatment for removing skin cancer early on is fairly simple and regularly successful. Listen to your children, listen to your patients, listen to your gut. If something isn't right, that is probably because it isn't. Get checked often and wear sunscreen. Story 8 none. I went in for a hernia operation. When I woke up, there were a bunch of doctors standing around me looking concerned. They said there was complications when they went in. They noticed my appendix about to explode, so they took that out instead. I thought that was a good idea and asked when they could fix the hernia. They looked at each other and said the appendix looked a little weird, so they sent it to the lab, and they'd get back to me. Turns out it was appendix cancer. Story 9, I was told I had an ovarian cyst at 32. My doc said he would do a needle aspiration to shrink it. Then he later said after that procedure it was the type to always come back, so he did surgery to remove the cyst. A few months later, he said the cyst was back and I needed to have the ovary removed. So he did that surgery each time. I was told it was not cancerously short. While later the town I lived in had a news story on that featured a new doc they had hired who was a GYN oncologist. My dad insisted I go see him. I felt it was ridiculous since I'd been told 3 times it was not cancer, but he was so worked up and worried, I set an appointment and was surprisingly told to come that week on a Friday and would be his last appointment for the day. My mom went with me as she was also worried. He had me come inside his office and told me he would be performing a total hysterectomy on Monday morning, and then samples from my abdomen would be collected many times. When he washed the area W saline, I was dumbfounded and asked him what he was talking about, as I knew I didn't have cancer. He said, "Oh no, you do for sure. I have wondered where you have been for months. I told your doc after I read the slide in the hospital, you had a very rare form of ovarian cancer. And because he did a needle aspiration, he may have allowed cancer cells to escape. I think my original doc messed up and keep trying to correct the problem with telling me he messed up. I'm now 61 and have been cancer-free for almost 30 years. Story 10, my little brother was having night sweats like soaking his bed bad and terrible pain in his pelvic area. The ER kept sending him home for like a month and thought he was a drug chaser due to his age mid-20s. His blood work was all jacked up and still wouldn't take him seriously until his wife, who was a nurse at the hospital, forced the issue, and then they found part of his pelvic bone eaten away due to acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He's now 3.5 years post-bone marrow transplant and traveling to Germany soon to meet his life-saving donor later this year. Story 11, no symptoms. My first mammogram. When I got home after they confirmed it, I still couldn't feel the lump. It was too deep. Women go for mammograms. Story 12, my speaking voice dropped over an octave over a period of a few months. My ear hurt all the time. No matter what I drank, I constantly felt like there was something stuck in my throat. I was eating Benadryl every few hours, convinced it was allergies. Eventually, I was so hoarse that I could hardly do my job. Vocal cord cancer, laryngeal. 2 years cancer-free. I did come out with a very 1940s Hollywood leading lady voice meets Janis Joplin. I actually kind of like it, and I very much like being alive. Story 13, a giant weird bruise that I had no memory of getting. It didn't convince me, but it convinced my roommate, who bullied me into going. She probably saved my life. Edit, since this is getting a lot of visibility, I will use it to raise awareness about another common symptom of either leukemia or other blood platelet problems, petechiae rash. Doesn't itch, doesn't hurt, so I ignored it. It was all over my lower legs and feet. If you see this on your skin, get it checked out. Story 14, a fever of 102 to 103 for 4 days straight, extreme exhaustion, and then I started having terrible night sweats. I've already had 2 heart transplants, so I'm pretty used to toughing it out. When I'm sick, I waited for 4 weeks to go to the doctor. The first doctor couldn't find anything wrong with me and said to take Tylenol for the fever. I had a weird feeling, so I booked an appointment with my old pediatrician, even though I was 19. After 5 minutes of looking at me, he felt my lymph nodes and down my spine and told me to go immediately to the ER. When I asked him why, he said just go. Turned out I had tumors in my lymph nodes on my heart, and it had spread to my spine. Stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. My pediatrician saved my life. Story 15, extreme fatigue. ID, sleep the whole night, only have to roughly an hour's worth of energy in the morning before feeling wiped from doing something as basic as eating breakfast. I had chalked it down to just having a lingering flu since the fatigue, dull body aches, and overall feeling of malaise felt super familiar. Yep, wasn't expecting cancer at all. ETA, for those who keep asking, it was lymphoma, but initial blood work didn't pick up anything alarming. A more extensive panel was ordered, and something obviously caught the attention of doctors that time. And I also underwent a CAT scan. Story 16, nagging abdominal pain, like a pulled muscle, that persisted for over a month. Doctor mostly ignored me for the first 3 visits. Had my gallbladder out for gallstones, but pain persisted. Doctor said it was pleurisy, nothing to worry about. I finally got mad and took myself to the ER and said I had chest pain. X-ray tech saw a faint shadow. Asked the doc if we could take another look. Turned out to be a baseball-sized tumor that my chiropractor had said was a knot in a back muscle and had been doing deep tissue massage to treat. Malignant pleural mesothelioma. Eternally grateful to that X-ray tech. Story 17, had blood in my stool. Had to go more often, no pain or anything. One time a lot of blood came out, went to emergency and got a colonoscopy, stage 4 colon cancer that had spread to my liver as a 31-year-old. Story 18, not my story, but my dad's story. About 25 years ago, my parents' best friend was in her 40s and dying of leukemia. They had caught it pretty late. My parents were both pack-a-day smokers at the time. They decided that they should make some changes in their life, quit smoking, and get some general screenings just in case. It turned out that my dad, also in his 40s at the time, had a pretty aggressive form of prostate cancer. He was lucky that he got checked when he did, because he probably wouldn't have lived to see 50 if he ignored it. They did surgery and followed up with radiation and chemo. He's been cancer-free for over 20 years now. So, to Opie's question, there were no specific symptoms for him, just an introspective urge to not be in the same boat as his friend. Story 19, not me, but my dad, and not quite related, but he had lower back pain unrelated to the disease and went to see the doctor. When he went, she did a checkup and told him that mole looks a bit odd. You should get it checked. Mole turned out to be Hep C that had caused cirrhosis on his liver, which had turned to cancer, and he had months to live. He went straight to the top of the transplant list and got a new liver. That was over 10 years ago. He's doing good now. Story 20, my sister was diagnosed with cancer, and I knew that my mammogram and pap smear were way overdue. So I did it. I almost didn't have the breast biopsy because everyone agreed that the spot on the mammogram was probably scar tissue. It wasn't. We're both doing fine now. Story 21, an all over itch that was unbearable and lasted for weeks. Also feeling like I had the flu for the same duration. It was staged for lymphoma, now several years into remission. Story 22, my back pain was so severe that I couldn't even sleep, so I went to urgent care. The x-rays found a kidney stone in one kidney and noticed my other kidney was enlarged. It was enlarged due to a tumor in my ureter. Story 23, irregular bleeding. My doctor ignored that. It progressed to pain and more bleeding. He ignored that too. Then I couldn't pee. He didn't ignore that. It took him over 2 years to take me seriously. Stage 3C colon cancer. And seriously, that doctor. Story 24, I was in bed and reached across my body for the covers. As my arm slid over my right breast, I felt a lump, but then told myself it was cold. So I was just feeling my nipple. Next night, same thing. So I spent a few minutes exploring it. I had just had a clean mammogram 4 months prior. I made an appointment with my primary care doctor to have it checked. She asked where I felt the lump, and I told her to check it out and tell me where it is. She found the same lump. Diagnostic mammogram, saw nothing. Ultrasound found it. They took a biopsy. That was just over 6 years ago. I had a lumpectomy and radiation. My oncologist did an oncotype test and determined I didn't need chemo. In GL, I teared up when he told me that. I try to encourage everyone I know, even males, that it's important to do self-exams. You need to know how your breasts feel so you can notice any changes. Mammograms may not catch everything. Story 25, I had many symptoms I kept telling my doctor about, all of which were caused by my weight according to my male doctor. What made them actually take notice and do the test was when I started hemorrhaging at work and had to be rushed to the hospital. Go figure, uterine cancer, 12 tumors, stage 3. Doctors don't listen when heavy women talk. Story 26, my son, 4 years old at the time, had some leg pains off and on for a week, and later he was just laying on the couch, not playing for a couple days because he was tired. We thought it was odd. He wasn't acting wild like normal. So my wife took him to his pediatrician, and they took blood samples. An hour later, we got a call from the pediatrician, and they told us to pack a bag and go to the ER. We found out he had leukemia after a lot more blood work. 3 years later, he finished treatment. Recently, he started having bone pains again, and we found out he had osteomyelitis, but after more scans, they found out he had also relapsed. We're a few days away from his bone marrow transplant. Thankfully, everything has been going well so far. Story 27, my vanity saved me. I had a lump on my outer left knee that I noticed if my leg turned a certain way. Saw my PCP, who took x-rays, thinking there was bone involvement, sent me on my way and said that it was nothing unless it hurt me. A few years later, it had grown and was visible at all times, so I got a new PCP and mentioned it. They again thought it was nothing, likely a cyst. They said it didn't hurt, it didn't impact my walking, but it was ugly to me, and I think my legs are one of my best features, so I insisted. She humored me and sent me to an orthopedic surgeon. He joked about how he never gets anyone going to him to get pretty legs. I again insisted. He humored me with an MRI. His tune changed when the imaging came back. Was sent to an orthopedic oncologist right away. No biopsy before since all tumors just need to be removed. Initially, primary biopsy during surgery. Said it was benign. They plucked it out, tumor the size of a walnut. Then full biopsy showed it was malignant sarcoma. Had to go back for second surgery to resect the whole area. My oncologist says my vanity did save me, and he tried to give me the prettiest scar he could. Story 28, one of my many birthmarks seemed to get lighter in color in the middle. Instead of soul brown, it was like light tan inside it. I got it checked out, and it turns out I caught stage 1 skin cancer. So it was at the easiest treatment stage. Just a rather large excision did the trick. Story 29, this is going to sound crazy. I had a sore on my stomach, and whenever I had sun exposure, it would get red and itchy and then scab. I just thought it was an irritation, so I put it off. Every night, I would have this recurring dream with someone telling me to go to the doctor and pointing at the spot on my stomach. So I make an appointment with my doctor, and here I had basal cell skin cancer. I was put on chemo cream that basically ate all of the bad cells away. My skin was like raw hamburger meat for a very long time after that. If it wasn't for that recurring dream, who knows what boat I'd be in today? Stay out of tanning beds. They are toxic and will give you skin cancer. That is a hill I am willing to die on. Story 30, not a survivor myself, but my daughter 8 is in the long-term maintenance portion of recovery from leukemia. Leukemia is a blood cancer, so bruising is generally one of the first signs. My daughter started having mosquito bites turn into bruises the size of softballs. So the morning she woke up at 4 years old with black and blue legs and arms from playing outside on the swing set the night before, we knew we had a problem. Story 31, intermittent bleeding while having BMs, never in my underwear, and only sometimes when wiping, no other symptoms. Thought maybe an internal hemorrhoid. Nope, S3 colon cancer at 39. 2023 ate me up and spit me out, but I'm cancer-free, and my head is topped with chemo curls. Story 32, thyroid for me. I went to my doctor for the first time in years for a completely unrelated issue. Doctor keeps staring at me as I talk, and then asks me to check my neck. Turn out that bulge in my throat was not my Adam's apple after all. Story 33, during COVID in 2021, I was digging in my backyard to build a new patio. Since I was using a shovel, I would have aches and pains after a whole day of digging. I kept getting a lot of back pain, so I assumed it was from digging, and the pain kept getting worse. So it took a week off, and the pain wouldn't go away. Eventually, it led to a cough, as well along with the back pain. So I felt I caught a chest infection or COVID. So decided to test for COVID, and results were negative. Then decided to call my family doctor, and they asked me to do an x-ray, and they believed I might have TB. So they gave me antibiotics and medication for it. A month goes by, and symptoms kept getting worse and worse. And eventually I go to the emergency room where they did a CT scan, and from the results they discovered a mass and cancer in my chest. Brutal 3 years of treatment, but I'm in remission officially. Story 34, I had a bit of pain in my nuts I was ignoring, and then my friend's golden retriever jumped up to greet me and hit me right in the sweet spot. That hurt more than it should have, and I went to the doctor that week. He sent me for an ultrasound, and there's nothing like having 2 women collaborate to ultrasound one's testicles. Doc removed the offending nut, and since it was cancer, I had 4 weeks of abdominal radiation, all cured 28 years ago. Story 35, I was getting constipated about every 6 weeks and was fine between bots. Then when I would mow my mom's yard 5 hours on the mower, I would get sore below my waist. I kept getting more sore over several months. I kept telling my husband that there was something wrong, but my symptoms were relatively mild, just persistent. So I procrastinated. Finally, I went to the doctor, and the second test she ordered was a colonoscopy. I was 49 and had stage 3 colon cancer. There were never any sharp pains or any questionable bowel movements. Nothing that screamed cancer. Story 36, do you remember the 21st night of September? Yes, I do, because I woke on the 22nd of September, 2021 with a slight ache in my left shoulder blade. Nothing major. I felt like I needed to crack it. Assumed ID. Slept wrong on it. I was 27 with no health issues before this. Over the next 2 months, a lot happened with no result. The ache never became a pain on my scale. Never moved or changed. Everything went to a hit around it, though. My GP wasn't seeing people physically because of COVID, and they only worked weekdays. Most of the times I needed something, I had to go to a small injuries clinic. TLDR, my sleep went to absolute over those 2 months. In the beginning, I was closing my eyes for 8 hours, but not sleeping. This made me irritable and snappy as the weeks went on. DR in the clinic thought it was a muscle issue. Pressed on the exact spot of the ache. Nothing happened. Gave me diazepam, and nothing happened. I don't have the receptors for it. Fun fact, Thought it was a trapped nerve, got an MRI, fell asleep in it because I was so tired. Came back all clear, yeah, got put on nerve pain tablets, got all the shite side effects like numb legs randomly. No concentration and fluid retention in my eyes. My energy by now, end of October 2021, was gone, but I couldn't sleep. My breathing was horrific. If I wore a mask at this stage, I was tickling my tonsils with it when I inhaled. That's how badly I needed oxygen. Finally, my GP saw me and listened as I explained all that. He looks at me besides the side effects of that drug. I have no idea what is going on. But what I do know is I want to do a blood test. Tuesday, November 2nd, get blood test done. Nearly pass out walking up the wheelchair ramp to the place at 6 p.m. I have an Instagram story saved of me, taking me about how bad my eyes look. I got a family of 4 shopping bags under my eyes. And at 6:10 p.m., my GP rings me and says my blood is just plasma, low red cells, white cells, and platelets. Explains a few symptoms. Wednesday, November 3rd, I get a call from the big hospital near me saying I need to come in regarding my bloods. I get in, nearly pass out again, walking down a long corridor on the flat. They take blood, do a COVID test, do a bone marrow biopsy, sounds as fun as it is, and come back with a diagnosis, finally cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I genuinely felt relief, finding out finally for sure what was causing everything. The ache in my shoulder was leukemic bone pain. They gave me a pain tablet, and I haven't felt it since. Thursday, 4th. I'm in an isolated room starting a month-long stay for treatment, August 2022. I'm free from isolation, remission, and into maintenance, back at work by October, January 2023. I feel a bit off, head rush, and food aversion. I'm a bit in tune with my body now, and I see if it's just a new side of my body. I get a routine lumbar puncture, as fun as it sounds, and they find leukemia cells in my cerebral spinal fluid, February, May 2023. I'm on immunotherapy to reduce the number of cells. Works well, and I am getting an allogenic stem cell transplant, bone marrow transplant. 4th of May, 2023, I received my new cells after total body irradiation. Just celebrated my first birthday. My hair is back, and I'm slowly gaining my strength back. I'm in the late effects clinic since December, way ahead of schedule. The moral of RHE story, get yearly blood tests. I don't give a flying how busy or healthy you think you are. I thought I was fine too. It probably won't be cancer, but it can spot something well before it becomes irreversible or damaging. Story 37, I am 34 and cancer-free. I was diagnosed at age 4, 30 years ago with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I had it for 4 years with 2 relapses until age 8 when I had full body radiation and a cord blood transplant, IRC. I was actually one of the first 100 U.S. patients to receive a cord blood transplant. The cord blood came from my younger brother born a year earlier. My parents saved it just in case. The procedure was done in Minnesota. Even though I live in New Jersey, since at the time it was only one of 2 hospitals in the U.S. that provided this service. As an undiagnosed 4-year-old, I was chronically tied all the time and my joints ached. I still have a few specific memories from back then when I was at a family vacation. My cousins of the same age were running around playing, and I just didn't have it in me. I just sat there watching, feeling fatigued. At a meal later, I just had lied down, and I lay in my chair with my head on my mom's lap. Initially, my parents thought I was lazy, but that was short-lived. I think my pediatrician immediately knew something was not right and suggested a blood test immediately. IRC. I think before being seen by anyone, the leading theory was I had mononucleosis. Pregnant women of Reddit, please donate your umbilical cord to save a life. It would normally be discarded as medical waste and doesn't cost you anything if you give it up to the public bank. More information. Story 38, not me, but a friend. He suddenly started to drastically lose weight, and he was a big guy. He kept insisting he felt fine, but I guess we nagged him too much, and he finally went to see a doctor. Turned out to be colon cancer. His doctor says they found it just in the nick of time, another week, and it would have spread. Story 39, my wife doesn't Reddit, but she had severe back pain. They couldn't find a cause on scans, eventually did exploratory surgery to find it, and she had a perforated colon from colon cancer stage 3C. Story 40, unfortunately, my cousin's story doesn't have a happy ending, but he'll share her symptoms because who would have guessed a very healthy 24-year-old would have cancer out of nowhere? She had some cold-like symptoms, nothing crazy enough to keep her from work. I remember one day at work she told me she started to get really overheated and dizzy, and her boss said she went completely pale. Her stomach felt really bloated for a few days. One day, her blood pressure read super high, and her mom convinced her to go to the ER. They found 2 liters of fluid in her lungs and abdomen. It turns out she had Burkitt lymphoma and died 3 weeks after her diagnosis in October 2023. I miss her terribly every day. Story 41, my friend had huge bruises that she couldn't find a reasoning for, ended up having leukemia. And my ex-boyfriend kept having blackout anger, and his vision started to blur. Had a tumor on his brainstem. I don't remember what specific type he had, but it was extremely aggressive, and he was gone within a year of diagnosis. Story 42. My mom came down with pneumonia in January of 2020. Before the pandemic started in the U.S., one day, she was having so much trouble breathing that she called an ambulance to take her to the hospital. Her health hadn't been fantastic for years, and she had asthma and chronic bronchitis, so she was figuring it was more of the same. I went to visit her 2 days later in the same week and walked in on the conversation with the oncologist. There was pneumonia, sure, and there was a mass about the size of a strawberry in her lung. It tested for non-small cell, squamous cell carcinoma, stage 2B. It wasn't in an operable location. Immediately, the chemo, immunotherapy, and radiation started, and then pandemic. I didn't get to see her much then. Dad was very protective of her. Funny thing was she had quit smoking nearly 12 years before. One night in December, she hemorrhaged from a teacup-sized hole in her lung, exacerbated by having her port flushed out with heparin. She had been told that very morning to get her affairs in order, as treatment was no longer prolonging her life. I was there with her when she died 2 days later in the ICU. She was 58, and I miss her every day. Story 43. Started having back pain. Figured it was from sitting around too much, as I tend to drive a lot and spend a bunch of time behind the screen. Eventually the pain got worse, and I started to get pain in my abdomen. The pain got so bad that I was taking the max dosage of acetaminophen and ibuprofen just to get to bed. Stage 3B germ cell tumor. Spread all over, but am cancer-free now. Story 44. For my wife, persistent UTI-like issues and frequent need to urinate. Doctor played it off as UTI, but continued. Wife pushed back and demanded further diagnosis. Couple of scans later revealed stage 2 colon cancer, which was putting pressure on her bladder. Surgery within 10 days, and is going on 5 years cancer-free. Story 45. My chest felt heavy, and I could not clear out the rasp in my cough. I was sure it was just an unusually heavy allergy season, but my wife insisted on a chest x-ray, and they found a spot, which turned out to be a lump, which was growing uncomfortably fast in the doctor's own words. Luckily, it was a contained lump with no significant branches or anything. So, one chest surgery recovery time, I'm back to full health. Story 46. Well, she did not survive. But to answer your question, when my wife first detected her breast cancer, she had a dime-sized spot above her breast that was warm to the touch. After a few days, it was quarter size and warmer than before. Went to the DR. He said, I don't know what it is, but it isn't cancer. They did a biopsy. It was cancer, stage 3. It ended up being a rare form of super aggressive breast cancer. Double mastectomy, radiation, and all the chemo her body could handle. She was in remission after 1 year. She had 3 pretty good years. Then it was back and spread all over. She was labeled terminal and opted for no further chemo. Lived another very bad couple of months. Story 47. My dad is one of those psychos who does ultramarathons. During a 100-mile race, he sent a picture of his to my mom to her off. He thought it looked odd because of all those gels gooey things you eat during races. My mom showed me. We basically had to hold a gun to his head to force him to get a colonoscopy. Stage 4 colon cancer. The freak beat it. This was a decade ago. Story 48. I was 3, fell off a 1-foot retaining wall in our backyard and started screaming. My mom's a nurse and knew it was something more than just being scared. Went to the ER and found a tumor on my kidney. After running a bunch of tests to determine what kind of tumor, they took the kidney out. Several rounds of chemo and radiation over the next year. And I've been cancer-free for 40 years. Story 49. Worked at a summer camp in college, and a 10-year-old asked me, why your neck's so big? When I got home for the summer, I told my nurse mother the story, and she actually agreed my Adam's apple looked enlarged. Turns out it was a tumor. Story 50. Initially, back pain and general malaise. I kept going back as the back pain got worse. Eventually, it was so bad it severely limited my quality of life. I was dismissed. Then I went back because my ribs seemed to be protruding on one side. Again, I was dismissed. I returned when the mass was so large they couldn't deny it, and I was finally sent for the CT scan I had requested for years. This scan revealed a 26 centimeters mass in my 120-pound body that was later revealed to be pancreatic cancer. Story 51. The early signs of my cancer were seen on a routine mammogram calcification areas. At that time, it was just watch. I went back for follow-up almost too late. I was supposed to go at 6 months. Hurricane Harvey came. I went later. Had I been doing even the most basic self-breast exam, I would have felt the mass. In remission, cancer. Not me, but my son, who was 4 at the time. He had a sore shoulder and couldn't raise his arm. Turned up to be leukemia 2.5 years later, and he's beaten it. Story 52. Hair was falling out. Irritability. Just thought it was the result of bariatric surgery. Got labs and show my TSH was out of. Again, thought it was the result of bariatric surgery. Doc recommended an ultrasound of my thyroid. I really didn't think it was necessary since the physical exam of my thyroid was fine. I decided to get the ultrasound done because it was my lunch break, and they had an opening worked at a hospital ultrasound, found suspicious nodules, had a biopsy a few days later, and was in surgery a week later to get my thyroid removed due to papillary thyroid cancer. Story 53 had what I thought was a warting round hair on my leg right over the shin bone, almost midway between knee and ankle. Wasn't growing at all, so I had ignored it for a long time. Wife convinced me to have it removed at this little place that did wart removal that basically cauterized it off. It grew back about 6 months later. Figured it was just a persistent wart, but was busy dealing with some other stuff at the time and figured I'd take care of it later. Out of my workshop one day and accidentally cut it on the edge of something table tool. I don't remember what. Over the next few weeks, it started to grow and bubble out like a raspberry. Went to a dermatologist and they did a biopsy. Turned out it was cutaneous leiomyosarcoma. They had to do an MRI to make sure it was, in fact, cutaneous because the subcutaneous can very aggressively spread if cut into. Fortunately, it was, although it was also sitting in the skin right over the shin bone, which presented an issue for cutting it out. Since there was barely enough skin to close the wound, I was able to get a great surgeon, real egotistical, but absolutely one of the best, and he was able to get it done without any skin grafts. Also, there was the danger that if it was deeper than they thought, since the MRI could only show so much, they might have to amputate to keep it localized due to the location. So I went into the surgery not knowing if I would wake up with both legs or not. Fortunately, again, everything worked out and I am cancer-free for 5 years now. I also have a really gnarly scar that looks like the stitch on a football.